The soldier came home to find his sister had sold their past to save a stranger's future. The hiss of the bus's air brakes was a sound of finality, a long, tired sigh that mirrored the one caught in Staff Sergeant Jackson Cole's chest. He'd spent 14 months dreaming of this sound, this specific release of pressure that meant he was no longer in the dust-choked air of Kandahar. The bus terminal smelled of diesel and damp asphalt, a perfume of homecoming he inhaled like the rarest spice. It was a world away from the metallic tang of cordite and sun-baked earth that had been his reality. He swung the duffel bag from the overhead rack, the weight familiar on his shoulder. It was heavy, packed with everything he owned, but it felt impossibly light compared to the body armor and the 70 pounds of gear he'd carried on patrol. That weight was different. That weight had settled in his bones. This was just canvas and cloth, the physical remainder of a life put on hold. He didn't call for a ride. He wanted to walk. He wanted to feel the solid, unbroken pavement of Oak Creek under his boots, to see the journey's end with his own 2 feet. It was a surprise. He hadn't told his sister, Olivia, the exact day. He'd pictured it 1,000 times during the long, star-blasted nights overseas, walking up the driveway, turning the key in the lock, and seeing her face break into a galaxy of shock and joy. The walk was a pilgrimage through a life he'd left behind. Each house was a landmark, a memory marker. There was the Henderson's place with its perpetually manicured lawn. The crooked oak tree he'd climbed as a boy, its branches still reaching like gnarled arms. The crack in the sidewalk by the fire hydrant where Olivia had fallen off her bike and he'd carried her home, her small hands clutching his shirt. Everything was exactly as he'd stored it in his mind. A perfect diorama of peace. It was this image, this promise of unchanging stability, that had served as his North Star through the chaos. It was the reason he'd re-enlisted, to protect this quiet corner of the world. His world. As he turned onto his own street, a faint signal pinged on his internal radar. A low-grade alert. The feeling was instinctual, honed by years of scanning horizons for anomalies. Something was off. He slowed his pace, his easy stroll tightening into something more measured, more analytical. It was the house. Their house. The one their parents had left to them, a brick and siding legacy of love and responsibility. The porch light was burned out. The welcome mat, a cheerful thing their mother had bought, was gone. The grass was a little too high, creeping over the edges of the walkway with a look of neglect. A knot of unease tightened in his gut. Olivia was meticulous. She treated the house like a sanctuary, a shrine to their parents. She would never let the lawn get shaggy or leave a dead bulb dark. He scanned the driveway. Her beat-up sedan was there, but the windows were filmed with a layer of dust and pollen. It hadn't moved in a while. He reached the front porch, his boots making hollow sounds on the wood. He reached for the spare key they'd always kept taped inside the lip of the mailbox. His fingers found the familiar metallic shape, cold and solid. A small measure of relief. At least that hadn't changed. He slid the key into the lock. The tumbler turned with a familiar click. He pushed the door open, ready for the scent of home, pine cleaner, the faint aroma of Olivia's lavender candles, the baked-in smell of 20 years of family dinners. The smell that met him was wrong. It was the scent of dust. Of emptiness. A sterile, still air smell, like a place that had been sealed and forgotten. The entryway was dark, the afternoon sun struggling to penetrate the grimy windows. He stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him with a soft thud that echoed in the silence. His eyes adjusted. He saw the wall first. The wall where their mother's favorite painting, a vibrant seascape, had always hung. It was bare. A ghostly, lighter rectangle on the faded wallpaper was the only evidence it had ever existed. "Liv," he called out. His voice was swallowed by the house. No answer. Just a profound, listening quiet. He dropped his duffel bag by the door. It landed with a heavy, muffled sound that seemed to underscore the hollowness of the space. He moved from the entryway into the living room, and his blood ran cold. It wasn't just the painting. Everything was gone. The plush sofa where he and Olivia had watched countless movies. the worn leather armchair their dad had loved. The heavy oak coffee table littered with old magazines and coasters. The television. All of it, gone. The only things remaining were pale indentations in the beige carpet, ghosts of furniture marking the positions of a life that had been dismantled. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This wasn't neglect. This was an evacuation. A gutting. He moved through the downstairs with the methodical, ground-covering pace of a soldier clearing a building. The dining room, table and chairs, gone. The corner cabinet that held their grandmother's china, gone. Panic began to claw at the edges of his training. His mind raced through scenarios, each one darker than the last. A robbery? A debt? Had something happened to Olivia? He took the stairs two at a time, his boots thudding on the bare wood. Olivia, he shouted, his voice raw with a fear he hadn't felt in the worst firefights. He checked his own room first. It was untouched, a time capsule of his teenage years, just as he'd left it. He pushed open the door to his parents' old room. Empty. The bed, the dressers, the nightstands, all vanished. Only dust motes danced in the slanted shafts of light. Then he heard it. A small sound from the end of the hall. From Olivia's room. A cough. A child's cough. A new, colder dread washed over him. He approached her door, which was slightly ajar. He pushed it open gently. The scene inside broke him. His sister was there, sitting on a bare mattress on the floor. She looked thin, her face gaunt, with dark, bruised-looking circles under her eyes. She was a shadow of the vibrant woman he'd left behind. And sitting beside her, cross-legged on the floor and coloring intently in a worn coloring book, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, with huge, brown eyes that widened in fear as they landed on him. The world tilted on its axis. The soldier in him assessed the scene in a split second, one adult female, malnourished. One child, wary but seemingly unharmed. No immediate threat. But the brother in him simply shattered. The carefully constructed image of his homecoming, the one that had kept him sane for over a year, crumbled into dust. Liv, he whispered. The name was a fragile thing in the stark, empty room. Olivia's head snapped up. Her eyes, wide and haunted, fixed on him. For a moment, she looked straight through him, as if he were a ghost conjured by her exhaustion. Then, recognition flooded her face, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated shame. The little girl, sensing the tension, scrambled behind Olivia, clutching the back of her shirt. "Jax," Olivia breathed, her voice a dry rasp. You're home. What happened?" His voice was flat, stripped of all emotion by the shock. He gestured vaguely at the empty room, the empty house. "Where is everything?" His eyes then fell on the child hiding behind his sister. "Who is this?" The questions hung in the air like smoke, sharp and acrid. Olivia flinched as if he'd struck her. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling silently down her hollowed cheeks. "Jax, please," she started, her voice trembling. It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" he pressed, the bluntness of a field interrogation creeping into his tone. He needed information. He needed to understand the shape of the disaster he'd walked into. "Did you get robbed? Are you in some kind of trouble?" The little girl peeked out from behind Olivia's back, her small face a mask of confusion and fear. Jack softened his tone, realizing he was terrifying the child. He took a knee, trying to make himself smaller, less of a threat. But his posture was rigid, his muscles coiled tight with a nameless anger and a profound, aching grief. "Her name is Lily," Olivia said softly, placing a protective hand on the girl's head. She's my friend Sarah's daughter." Jax knew Sarah. They'd all grown up together. "Where's Sarah?" Olivia's face crumpled. "She's gone, Jax. She got sick. It was fast. An infection that went septic. 1 week she was fine, the next, her voice broke. There was no one else. Her family lives halfway across the country and they couldn't. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see. He looked around the barren room again, the truth dawning with sickening clarity. The money ran out, didn't it? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The emergency fund their parents had left them. It was supposed to be a fortress. She nodded, unable to meet his gaze. The funeral costs for Sarah took what little she had. I couldn't let them take Lily. I couldn't let her go into the system. She's just a baby. He finally understood. So you started selling things, it wasn't a question. Just small things at first, she confessed, the words pouring out in a torrent of shame and desperation. Jewelry. Some of the lesser paintings. But then Lily needed new shoes, and she got an ear infection, and the rent was due. The part-time job at the library wasn't enough. So I sold the TV. Then the sofa. I kept telling myself it was just stuff. That it didn't matter as much as she did. The last of his anger evaporated, replaced by a vast, hollow ache in his chest. He looked at his sister, really looked at her. He saw the fierce, desperate love in her eyes as she stroked the little girl's hair. He saw the same protective instinct that had driven him into the army, reflected back at him in this stripped-down, heartbreaking way. She had been fighting a war of her own. A silent, lonely war on the home front, armed with nothing but a dwindling bank account and a ferocious sense of duty to a friend's child. While he had been facing down enemies he could see, she had been battling poverty, loneliness, and despair in the empty rooms of their childhood home. "Why didn't you tell me, Liv?" he asked, the question filled with a sorrow that was almost too heavy to bear. "Why didn't you just call me?" "And say what?" she cried, her voice cracking. "Hi, Jax, hope you're not getting shot at, but by the way, I'm failing. I'm broke. I've lost control of everything. You were over there, doing something important, something real. I couldn't put this on you. It was my problem to solve. I was supposed to be holding down the fort." He closed his eyes. Holding down the fort. That's what they had promised each other. He'd protect the world outside, and she'd protect the world within these four walls. But the world had breached her perimeter, and he hadn't even known. The guilt was a physical weight, heavier than any pack he'd ever carried. He had been so focused on his mission, so lost in his idealized vision of returning to a perfect, untouched home, that he had completely missed the SOS signals she had been too proud to send. He pushed himself to his feet and walked out of the room, needing air, needing space. He paced the empty hallway, his boots echoing a lonely rhythm. He ran a hand over his face, the rough scrape of his short-cut hair a grounding sensation. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was a shell. A testament to his sister's sacrifice. He had a choice to make. He could rage against the loss, mourn the physical pieces of their past that were now scattered in pawn shops and second-hand stores across the county. He could be angry at Olivia for her pride, for her secrecy. Or he could accept the new reality. He could understand that home was not a collection of objects. It was not a static place frozen in time. He walked down the stairs and out the front door, leaving it open behind him. The late afternoon air was cool on his skin. He walked aimlessly for a few minutes until he found himself standing in front of Mr. Abernathy's house next door. The old man was in his garden, meticulously tending to his tomato plants. Mr. Abernathy looked up, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "Jackson! Lord, it's good to see you, son. Welcome home." "Good to see you too, Mr. Abernathy." The old man's eyes were kind but perceptive. He glanced from Jax's tense face toward the open front door of the Cole house. "Things change," he said, not as a question, but as a gentle statement of fact. "But your sister, she's a good woman. Got a heart as big as this whole town. A real fighter, that one. Just like your mother." The simple words landed with the force of a revelation. A fighter. That's what she was. A warrior. Her battlefield was just different from his. Her sacrifices were quieter but no less profound. Jax nodded slowly, a sense of clarity cutting through the fog of his grief and confusion. His mission had been to come home. But now he saw that his mission wasn't over. It had just changed. The objective was no longer to return to the past. The objective was to secure the future. He walked back to the house, his steps now filled with purpose. He went back upstairs to Olivia's room. She was still sitting on the mattress, her arms wrapped around Lily, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. Olivia looked up at him, her eyes full of apprehension, waiting for his verdict. He didn't say anything about the furniture. He didn't mention the money or the secrecy. He walked over, knelt down, and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from Lily's forehead. Then he looked directly at his sister, his gaze steady and clear. "Go get your purse," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We're going to the grocery store. Looks to me like we need to restock the pantry." For a second, Olivia just stared at him. Then her face, so tight with fear and shame, finally broke. A sob escaped her, a sound of such profound relief that it seemed to shake the whole room. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but for the first time since he'd arrived, they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of hope. The immediate crisis was over. The silence between them was broken, replaced by the quiet understanding that they were a unit again. The empty rooms didn't feel so cavernous anymore. They felt like a clean slate. A place to begin again. 6 months passed. The harsh emptiness of the house had softened. It wasn't full, not like it used to be, but it was no longer a shell. Jax had used his combat pay and savings not to repurchase the past, but to build a new present. A sturdy dining table stood where the old one had been. A comfortable, simple sofa sat in the living room, big enough for the three of them. He'd taken a job at the local hardware store, the quiet order of the aisles and the simple, solvable problems of plumbing and wiring a balm for his soul. His days were no longer measured by patrols and watches, but by school runs, helping Lily with her cren-scrawled homework, and making sure Olivia was eating enough. He was learning a new kind of vigilance, a domestic surveillance that involved checking for fevers and making sure nightmares were chased away. One crisp autumn afternoon, he stood at the kitchen window, watching Olivia and Lily in the backyard. They were raking the fallen oak leaves into a massive pile, their laughter carrying on the cool air. Olivia looked different. The gauntness was gone, replaced by a healthy glow. The constant fear had finally receded from her eyes, leaving behind the warmth he remembered. Lily, who had been a timid ghost of a child, was now a whirlwind of energy, diving into the leaves with a joyful shriek. She saw him watching and waved, a bright, unhesitating gesture of belonging. He felt a hand tug on his jeans and looked down. Lily had run inside, her cheeks flushed red from the cold. She beamed up at him and wrapped her arms around his legs in a fierce hug. He rested his hand on top of her head, the fine strands of her hair soft beneath his calloused palm. He looked past her, through the window at his sister, at the leaf-strewn lawn, at the house that was slowly, piece by piece, becoming a home again. He realized the duffel bag he'd carried back from the war, the one that represented the burdens he bore, had finally been unpacked. Its contents hadn't been clothes or souvenirs, but duty and guilt, and a longing for a home that no longer existed. He had laid those burdens down here, in this quiet place, and picked up a new one. This new mission had no endpoint. It had no clear enemy. Its victories were measured in laughter, in shared meals at a simple wooden table, in the peaceful sleep of a child who finally felt safe. His war was over. His service had just begun.